Day 5, period 2. I'm a little bit sad because, it's coming to a close, but we still have some great things to happen that are going to happen today, and I hope you are as excited as I am to be here today, as always. We have some thank yous. As always, we want to make sure we thank the boosters for their great support of this event. So if you have a booster that lives in your home, give them a big hug when you get home and say thank you for us. We want to thank the FREMD administration for allowing us to continue doing this every year. We want to make sure we thank the awesome FREMD English department, and especially the newly crowned organizers of this event, Gina Ank and Russ Anderson, for their tremendous work on this week, getting it ready, starting basically the minute Writers Week closed last year to get it ready for this year. A few reminders. The most important one is, please, you've heard it all week, take out your iPads, your iPhones, and turn them off so that you can give your full attention to the writers who are here to share their thoughts and ideas with you today. So that brings me to our introduction for Kat Banakis. Kat holds a BA in Religious Studies from Yale University. She has a Master's of Divinity, also from Yale University. You can tell she's a pretty smart cookie. And she also has a high school diploma from FREMD High School, as she is a 1999 grad, and we are so proud that she is a homegrown writer. She is currently a priest at St. Luke's Episcopal Church in Evanston. She's also worked as a federal lobbyist, so she's got a very varied past. She's written a book called Bubble Girl, An Irreverent Journey of Faith. I read it over a year ago, and when I started reading it, I couldn't put it down because she shares stories from her life, some that are really, really funny and heartwarming, and some that are pretty emotional and heart-wrenching. Stories of things that really happened in her life to get her to where she is today. And I hope she shares some of those stories today, because it'll make you want to read her book too. If you're interested in purchasing her book, it's $15. She'll have some copies here after she's done speaking today. Feel free to come down and introduce yourself, get a picture, buy a book, get a signature, and just meet her. She's a pretty fabulous person. So without further ado, I would like to give the microphone over to Kat Banakis.
Good morning. So I wanted to talk in a couple different ways today about how you think about your audience for writing. And I spend a lot of time thinking about this for a couple of reasons. One is that, as Mrs. Klingner said, I'm a priest at a church in Evanston, and so I give a lot of sermons, as one might imagine. And one of the things I think about most in terms of doing that is making these stories relevant to that audience, right? I'm looking at Bible stories, not just in their own right, but in terms of how they're going to impact the lives of the people I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to talk about that a little later. But I have 3 jobs because the church doesn't pay, and fewer people are going to churches, so there are fewer and fewer jobs, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean that I need a day job. And so I work full-time for a company that tries to help big nonprofits, so hospitals and universities, fundraise better. And for that, I do a lot of writing where I'm thinking about my audience in a different way in terms of, okay, these are people who have hired me to try to make their work faster. How do I write to them? And I have a 3rd job in that I'm starting an interfaith ethics podcast with some of the people who work with WBEZ and the Chicago Sunday Evening Club. And so for that, when I'm writing, I'm thinking about, all right, here I have 30 minutes on a piece of radio tape, and I want to get across all of these different interviews, and I want to get across this one conversation. How do I do it in this really tight time frame? And also, you don't necessarily think of this when you're listening to a podcast or a radio show, but they have really orchestrated breaks of like, it's mandated. This is when music comes in. This is when we have a break for news. This is this other thing. And so you're thinking about writing for an audience within like 3.27 minutes, you know? So all of these different things come into play, and whenever you're doing writing for a different audience within a different format, the style of writing that you're going to do changes. And so I wanted to talk today about a couple different examples of that, because all of you are going to use writing throughout your lives, as you already have, sometimes written, sometimes in giving speeches, in all different ways, but even the structure of the sentences that you use and everything like that is going to change depending on the venue and the format. So I'm going to start out by doing a little reading from the book that I wrote, and the intended audience for this was people under 40 in church discussion groups. So it's meant to be used as like a discussion guide in churches for people after college, before they have very many kids. That was sort of the vision for it. And it's meant to be read. So that means that I could play around with the sentences being much longer than if it was something that I meant just for oral communication. Because when you're doing something that's purely being absorbed by the ear, your sentences have to be really short and you have to be really repetitious. You have a lot more latitude with what you can do when the intent is that people will read it. All right, so what you need to know for this story is that, and this story takes place partly in this very room, and the only thing you need to know for that is that the chairs in here used to be orange. All right. Frequently, as a person working in churches, I get asked questions about what does such and such mean in the Bible, or what does the Bible say about some topic. And the truth is that we use passages of the Bible the same way we use statistics. Sometimes we use them to inform opinions, but more often than not, we use them to reinforce what we've already made our minds up about. We back up into the text. Rather than asking, what does the Bible say about X, a more helpful question I find is, what do you hope that the Bible will say about X, and why? And then we can have a conversation. And sometimes in those conversations, I want to tell people about my first kiss. It was staged. 3 sections of orange upholstered seating spread out in a fan in the high school auditorium. I played Bella, the mentally off aunt in Neil Simon's Lost in Yonkers, and Fareed played my romantic interest. We were both 16. It was romantic, really, surrounded by our classmates in historical costumes that smelled of other people's sweat and stage makeup. And we held off on actually kissing as much as possible. In rehearsals, we marked the blocking for the kiss, just facing one another and puckering up and then quickly turning away. Fareed's parents had emigrated from Algeria when he was an infant to escape the Civil War. And when we finally kissed, he had just put on chapstick, and my lips came away shiny and wet as if I had been bumped from behind before I was about to eat a forkful of chicken. Kissing was perhaps the natural progression after spending nearly every day after school rehearsing for something or another, and every Saturday between October and March at a theater competition, and many school dances straddling him in public. Because I have pictures taken in front of fireplaces of my friends' homes to document each of the dances, I know that I had various dates to different dances and even went stag to homecoming one year, but Fareed was my dominant and default date, and we had a signature move. Our signature move on the dance floor was a swing-style partner routine lift that we'd learned from a show choir medley for Grease. I would get a labored running start and then jump up onto Fareed, interlacing my fingers behind his neck while bracing my forearms against his collarbones. And then using the momentum from my running start, he'd swing me, my legs, to his left side and then right side and then straight up to gain force for the big move. Ideally, in a pied de resistance, I would swing and straddle him and then end in a stand. Sometimes we had to adapt so that I would roll on the ground and then get up and stand, all within the 8 count, and make it look natural. I liked our move. Fareed loved our move, and we agreed that it was a skill that ought not be limited to staged Broadway medleys in matching sequence. So we adapted the sequence for straighter skirts and any song really with an 8 count. What makes a good pop song great? A partnered swing routine. None of the theater crowd was exactly surprised when Fareed came out of the closet our junior year. We weren't sure how to react, though, when his parents kicked him out of the house. Another geek theater girl and her single mother took Fareed to live with them for the rest of high school. And sometimes Fareed smelled bad, because then he had to buy his own deodorant, and in a household of all women, he'd forget to put it on the grocery list. Maybe, I thought, maybe his parents were just being Algerian. But Algerian didn't account for what happened one afternoon when Fareed asked me to drive him to his parents' house to pick up some clothes he'd left when moving out. I'd driven Fareed home 1,000 times before. He didn't have a car and was a complete ride hog. He would never offer to chip in for gas and never once invited me in. He'd just jump out at the curb. This time, though, he asked me to come in with him. And as soon as we walked inside, his mother flew into the foyer where we stood. "Get out," she shrieked. "Get out, you disgust me. You're with men? You're not my son." And he went into the kitchen to get something, and she continued, "You are a sickness." And then she turned, pointing to me, and began, "And you? Are you like him? Do you go with women?" I didn't know what to say. "Go to the car," Fareed told me. And I sat in the front seat of my parents' minivan, shaking, and pulled it forward a house length. Arms full of clothes, Fareed climbed into the passenger seat a few minutes later. "I didn't think she'd do that if you were there." I have never before or since witnessed such vile hatred directly at a person in real life. Only in scripted plays. Maybe, I thought, maybe his mother was fitting into the neighborhood. Another person I went to a dance with had a sister who came out as a lesbian while we were in high school, and that guy heartily supported his parents in kicking her out of the house, and they were all redheaded Catholics. My sister went to the same high school I did many years later. And I'm amazed by the anecdotes she tells of friends of hers who are bi-curious and experimenting, and teachers who are open about their same-sex partners. But when I was there in the 90s, See You at the Pole, a National Day of Prayer, was the largest student gathering each year, even though it wasn't school-sanctioned. It was bigger than the homecoming football game. And the girls' bathroom stalls were defaced with Jesus fish graffiti and John 3:16. And almost equally palpable to this public religiosity did the Gay-Straight Alliance, and a few joined in solidarity. Like solidarity. Soon, Fareed's whole world became gay. Everything was an entree to discuss his sexuality. I'll give you an irrational number. It's called a queer teen. And he almost lost his first name the way young doctors do. He was gay, and also his name was Fareed. One afternoon of our senior year, we sat on the floor with our backs against the lockers in the English hallway while we waited for our rehearsal slot. "So you're Christian," Fareed began. "Yep," I answered. "And I'm gay." "You're way gay," I corrected. "Way gay," he agreed. And then he fell silent, twisting the combination lock above his head. "Do you think I'm going," he asked, "do you think I'm going to hell?" "Nope." Because the Bible, and before I could stop myself, I exploded. Jesus says jack about homosexuality in the Bible. Some people will say horrible, hateful things to you, but I won't, and I'm sorry they will. I won't. Who you are is not a sin. And then we sat there quietly holding hands until the door of the classroom opened and we went into practice. I spoke before I had the academic and theological underpinning to back up my statements, but my brain then spoke the same words I'd say again today. Who he was funny and created by a loving God. And when I read scripture, I find too much biblical evidence for compassion and for God's desire for all of creation to flourish, to condemn Fareed. My resolve was cemented some years later on an otherwise forgetful and cold February day when I received an email telling me that Fareed had committed suicide. Fareed is unique to me because he was my friend, but he was not and is not statistically unique. When I read scripture in light of questions about sexuality, my friend is my lens. I read the Bible hoping that I will find something that will make him want to live. What would reassure him that he was perfectly created in the image of a loving God? What reinterpretation would reinforce love of God and love of people? And all of the interpretations that exist are valid, but we all read them hoping that they're going to say something. Thank you. So that's an example of writing for the I, and writing for a specific way in which people are going to have the opportunity to think about this and put it down and reread a sentence. And now I want to go into what one might do if you're writing for the ear. And this is a type of writing that you're probably going to have to do at some point, because even if public speaking isn't your thing, chances are you have a brother or sister or best friend or parent, and one of those people is either going to get married or die in your lifetime. And at some point, you will have the officiant for the event turn to you and say, and now a few words from the sister, the friend, the, son, daughter, child, whatever it is. And everyone in the room, as you get up to speak, is going to have the same panic attack happening of, oh no, please don't let this be awful. Because there is nothing worse than a bad event toast or a bad event speech. And I have to give one of these every week, doing a sermon, which is more or less a special event speech for a couple hundred people. And there are many ways to do these things, but because all of you are going to have to do this at some point, I thought I would share with you sort of a tried and true formula for doing one of these that tends to work. So here's the formula. You set up a story, you tell a story, just one, about the person, about their life, and then you interpret it for your audience. And the interpreting for your audience is what makes a good speech great, because you've taken the time to think about who's going to be listening to it and what you want them to get out of it. The story would be the story no matter what, but you want them to be changed by something you're saying about the person who's getting married or about the person who died. Something about, if they're getting married, you're telling the story and you're telling this story because this shows what a great life they're going to have together, or something really wonderful. If the person is dead, you're telling the story for the audience to interpret what this person's legacy is going to be for the people who are listening there. Because you have a precious amount of time at a mic. You want to keep these things really short. And you want the people who are listening to you to somehow be changed. That's the goal of it. And so to demonstrate this, I'm going to do a little speech, and then we'll look under the hood as to how it was put together. And this is the same thing that I would do in setting up a radio show also, is you set it up, you say what they're going to hear, you do the interview, and then you have some people talking about what that meant. All right, so to do this, I'm going to do a Bible story, and I should have said this earlier, but I didn't. And that is that I am a religious professional, and I am not trying to convert any of you to Christianity, right? I am here talking about how we use text, how we use rhetorical skills, and the material that I tend to work with is really old stories written down in history that some people find religious. I am not doing it with the objective of changing your opinions about religion at all. And I speak only for myself. I do not speak on behalf of anyone employed by Fremd or District 214, all right? That's why they laughed in the first one. I was like, that's not funny. This is a legal caveat. 211. And my parents still lived on the block. Okay, thanks, guys. All right. So to understand this story, we need to understand a little bit about the historical time when they didn't have school districts by number, and also about the characters that we're going to talk about. So historical time, it is massive tribal warfare. And the tribes are conquering one another, and each tribe has its own god. And when one tribe conquers another, one of the ways that they show that their tribe is better and their god is way better is that they build a temple for their god, because this shows that they didn't have to move, right? They were able to stay still long enough to build something with bricks or wood instead of being slayed by another tribe. And then there are two characters in this story. One is a guy named Nathan, who's very boring. He's just good, but he's pretty dull. And frequently, characters in Bible stories are like very magnified in their characteristics. So Nathan is very good and very boring. That is all he is. David, on the other hand, is a little bit more complex. He is like the handsomest ever. The Bible makes a lot of notions of like, he was not just handsome, he was the handsomest in the land. And he is not just a good warrior, he is the bestest warrior that ever there was. And he is a man of significant appetites insofar as he sees a lady he likes, and the next day he makes sure her husband is killed. So he's a man who gets his needs met, and he's not used to being disappointed. All right. So here's the story, and it's taken from 2 Samuel, which is part of the Hebrew Scriptures. When King David was settled in his house, and the Lord had given him rest from his enemies around him, the king said to the prophet Nathan, "See now, I am living in a house of cedar, but the ark of our God stays in a tent." Nathan said to the king, "Go, do all that you have in mind, for the Lord is with you." But that same night, the word of the Lord came to Nathan. "Go, tell my servant David, thus says the Lord, are you the one to build me a house to live in? I have not lived in a house since the day I brought up the people of Israel from Egypt to this day. I have been moving about in a tent and a tabernacle. Wherever I have moved among all the people of Israel, did I ever speak a word with any of the tribal leaders who I commended to shepherd my people, saying, 'Why have you not built me a house of cedar?' No. Now therefore, thus shall you say to my servant David, 'Thus says the Lord of hosts, I took you from pasture, from following the sheep to be prince over my people Israel. And I have been with you wherever you went, and have cut off all your enemies before you, and I will make for you a great name, like the name of the great ones of the earth. And I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and will plant them so that they may have their own place and be disturbed no more. And evildoers will afflict them no more as formerly, and the time I have appointed judges over Israel, I will give you rest from all of your enemies. Moreover, the Lord declares to you that the Lord will make you a house, and when your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring after you, and offspring after you who shall come forth from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He, your offspring, shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be a father to him," blah, blah, blah. "Your house and your kingdom shall be made sure ever before me. Your throne shall be established." And in accordance with these words and all this vision, Nathan spoke to David. So what happened here? David finishes battles. He declares, "I am going to build for my Lord a temple. He deserves to be in a house of cedar, not in a tent." And the Lord comes back and says, "No." David's God, who we'll call the Lord, has other ideas. David is not going to build the Lord a temple. David's son will, but not David. And it's easy for Bible stories to seem really distant and far away because they're so old. But think for a minute what it might have been like to be David. You're a decent person on balance. You kill some people's husbands, but on balance, you're a good guy. And you work hard, and you're very famous, and you're very good looking, and you're all hyped up, and you make this declaration, "I am gonna build this thing," and then the Lord comes back and says, "No." And scholars and analysts of this story are quick to point out that David isn't being punished. Rather, it just wasn't his time. So here's poor David. He's done this very public thing of declaring it, and other people no doubt knew about it. And then he gets a big public shaming, an embarrassment, a no way. And it's that horrible feeling of public and private shame at once. And maybe you've had something like this too, a momentary epic fail where people know about it. You know, it's just the worst when there's some amount of public, right? Like, not only did the person turn you down for turnabout, but other people were there to see it. And not only did you not make the goal, but everyone on the team was aware of it. And not only did you goof on your grade, but the paper dropped and the people around you saw what it was. And it's the worst. But David goes on to do something pretty cool and remarkable in the face of public shame and embarrassment, but it gets lost in translation. Because in Hebrew, there's this one word, bayit, which in English gets translated as house and dynasty and legacy and throne and family and temple. But in Hebrew, it's all one word. So David says, I'm going to build you a house. And the Lord comes back and says, no, you're not. You're going to build me a house, by which I mean temple, a house, by which I mean dynasty, a house, by which I mean family and legacy. And David seems to take this to heart, into consideration, that he has to reframe what success is going to look like for himself, not in the immediate house, but in the sense of Bait in its grander sense. And we know this because in the next battle that David goes into, his approach to leadership changes. All of a sudden, he seems to realize that his legacy is going to be exclusively his reputation as a leader. He's not going to have a building with his name on it. So the next time he goes into battle, he subdues a tribe and he goes to their leader and says, is there anyone here to whom I may show kindness? And the battle after that, he slays the tribe and goes to them and says, I want you to know that I will deal loyally with you. In the absence of a physical building, his palace and his dynasty becomes his reputation. And I think that that might be the lesson in all of this for us, that in those moments of awful, horrible public-private shame that we all have, that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is to reframe for ourselves what success is going to look like in the long term. We too have to retranslate Bait. We have to figure out how we're still going to have fun at the dance or not, how to have athletic success or academic success. You know, maybe it's that by the end of the year, you're going to have one new experience or set a PR in your sport or learn the concepts of the chapter or just learn what the teacher's asking for. But in each case, we're having to reframe what success is going to look like and retranslate that momentary shame into something else for ourselves. And what David gives us is a model in how to use disappointment and embarrassment for a different thing. Okay, end of that part. So what just happened? Now we have to look under the hood. I set up a story, I told you who the characters were, what the context was, then I told the story, and then I said what it might be about and what we might get out of it. And I told the story the way the story was going to be told. The story happened. But the difference is how you adapt the interpretation for your audience. And I think through the story itself in a couple different ways. And there's 4 different lenses that are used: behind, in, around, and in front of. And I realize that this sounds a little bit like a Spanish class preposition exercise, right? But behind the text is the historical dimensions of what are going on. So what was happening with tribal warfare? What would you want to do with a temple? You look in the text for what's happening in the story itself as a literary element. And that was the element of Bait, so figuring out what the words actually mean. You look around the text for how different scholars would interpret it in history. And then you look in front of the text for where it's leading. And as you're preparing for a speech at a funeral or a wedding, that's how you want to think through your story. All of these different things that you could pull out of it and could give you lenses into what to look at. And then you come to your audience. And my sister works in advertising, and they have this adage there that I think is really helpful, which is your audience is not you. And it's not you in the past necessarily. I gave a version of this I wrote a version of this and gave it to my boyfriend, and he was like, ooh, that's going to be really interesting for 2% of the audience. And it was, disappointing to hear that initially, but also really helpful to remember that my audience isn't me, and it's not me 15 years ago. In fact, your audience is significantly different than you are, and people learn and think differently. And there's a learning psychologist at Harvard called Howard Gardner who has these 8 different frames of learning. And usually in a really good speech, elements of all of these 8 frames are going to come into play because you want people who think differently to still be able to resonate with it. So some people think in terms of emotions and internal things. Other people tend to think in terms of interacting with other people. And so the internal would be, that horrible feeling that happens when you're in shame. And the interaction would be not only David's interaction with Nathan, but also how David told other people about it. And then how David interacted with other tribal leaders afterwards. Some people are really musical, so you want to have a rhythm to your speech. Others are very logical, so you want there to be some element of if this, then that. And some people are really physical, and so you want to have something that talks about physical feelings, right? A feeling in your stomach, a feeling in your throat, or you want to have something that moves in the story. Because to reach the most number of people, you want to have at least a little something that touches with a lot of different folks. And it helps to write it down. People who give something off the cuff and seem really good at it, a pastor who speaks without notes, a stand-up comedian who just gives their thing, it was all written in the past and they memorized it, or nearly written and they memorized it. Because if you don't write things down, you ramble. And some part of it that you think is going to be superbly interesting just isn't. And you get that by writing it down. And you also get it by giving the speech to someone else before you give it to an audience of 500. David Axelrod, who's a presidential advisor, was just being interviewed about how he does practice debates and speeches with President Obama, who by and large is a really good speaker, but even he needs a test audience. And pets and mirrors do not give you what another person is going to give you. And while it's hard to receive criticism, you'd rather receive it then than some other time. And the final thing I should say about this is that if you ever want to err on the side of, should we tell another story, should we keep going, or should we stop, you always want to stop. Always keep it short. Nobody's ever going to be like, I wish they had kept talking. More often, they're going to wish that you had stopped. And so with that, I'm going to take my own advice and stop, but we have a couple minutes, and so I would love to answer any questions you might have. We can have a little conversation. All right. So any brave hands? I'm told that there's someone back there. No? It's okay if there aren't. There's one down. Oh, yes. Hello. The orange seats looked horrible. Yeah, and everyone looked horrible against them because orange is not flattering to anybody. And they were really rough. It's like this is a little bit smoother upholstery, but they were horrible. Yes, I can't see you, but yes. Sorry, what's that? Oh, so the story in the Bible? Yeah, there's not a name to the story, but the part of it's from is from 2 Samuel, which is fun. Yes. Okay, so the question was, how did I know I wanted to go to Yale and pick the career I did? I applied to Yale on a whim. I applied to all schools in the Midwest and then one Ivy, just 'cause. And I got in, and that was a surprise to everyone. not the least of which is my family. So that was a shock. And I sort of stumbled into my career. I always knew I really liked religion and thought it was interesting, but I didn't think I wanted to do it for a career. And then through a series of things, it sort of just kept coming up again and again, and then I liked it more and more. And it's super fun, because I get to do weddings and funerals and baptisms, and also be with people in really fun moments, and I get to write, which is awesome. Yep. That's a great question. What's a Master's of Divinity? It does not make you more divine, sad to say. So seminaries and divinity schools are graduate schools in religion, and they usually offer 2- and 3-year degrees. The 2-year degree, you're just doing academic preparation to either be a teacher or something like that. And then your 3rd year, you do internships where you practice preaching and you practice counseling and everything like that. So it's like a master's in social work or anything like that, except it's the academic certification you need to be a pastor in most churches. Not all, but many. Yeah. Do what is? Yeah, I mean, in terms of when I'm preparing a sermon, or in general, yeah. I mean, like, I told the first hour, if I'm preparing a speech or something like that, I'll do. It's usually 1 to 2 hours of preparation for every moment of speaking, every minute of speaking. So if I'm doing like a 10-minute speech, it's probably 10 to 20 hours of research and preparation. And like, yes, I'm looking at the text, but I'm looking at all different commentary on it and all different things that are going on. So I think that research is really critical, because it's not just your opinion. Awesome. Thank you.